Oh, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Town Forum. The time is 6 o'clock. I think we have everybody here. This meeting is being held under the regulations which came into effect on the 4th of April 2020 in response to the COVID-19 situation. So that's why we're meeting virtually rather than in person. My name is Councillor Kathleen Becker, Chairperson of the Forum. There are, of course, the same housekeeping matters to run through as we are working under these slightly strange practices in response to the regulations. First of all, can I please ask everyone that your microphones remain muted and your camera is turned off whilst you're not addressing the meeting. This does help to reduce background noise and also avoids any unintentional disturbances. Can I also please advise that the meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. A video recording will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Members and officers, where appropriate for each item, please use the chat function of the meeting to indicate that you wish to speak or to raise a point of order or explanation, and I will then invite you to speak at the appropriate time. Each member will be invited to speak in turn, so please keep your contributions as clear and as concise as possible. When speaking and referring to the agenda papers, please reference the page or the paragraph number. That just makes it easier for everyone to find where we are, especially using the online virtual papers. Please note that the duration of this meeting is planned for 2 hours. If members wish to leave the meeting at any point, please let me know through the chat function, and I will announce to the meeting that you are leaving. Can I ask the Democratic Services Officer to take a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you wouldn't mind unmuting your microphones, it just speed up the roll call slightly. Councillor Becker.
Here.
Councillor Krask.
Here.
Councillor Ferguson. Oh, apologies, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Green.
Good evening, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hiscock.
I'm here. Thank you.
Councillor Hutchison. Councillor Hutchison.
So, yes, I said I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lerney.
Present.
Councillor Mather.
Here, sorry.
Thank you.
Here I am.
Councillor Murphy.
I'm present.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, present, thanks.
Councillor Thompson.
Hello, present.
Councillor Todd.
Present.
And Councillor Weir.
I'm present.
Thank you, members. Chair, that's all members present, with apologies from Councillor Ferguson. Chair, if it's helpful, do you want me to do a quick rundown of which officers we've got in the meeting?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So on item 6, members, we've got Simon Finch and Adrian Fox. Regarding item 7, we've got Simon Finch again, Richard Summers from Boyle and Summers, and several colleagues. And then on item 8, we've got Darren Kennedy. In addition to that, there is Richard Botham down here in the St Giles room, and myself and Dave Shaw. And finally, members, just to advise, we've got 2 members of public with us this evening, Patrick Davis and Emma Back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, we will move to the items on the agenda, the first item of which is apologies, and I think we have apologies this evening from Councillor Ferguson.
Correct, Chair, yeah.
Thanks. Moving now to disclosure of interests. Do members have any interests that they need to disclose at this time? If they can do that through the chat function, that would be great. No interests to disclose, anybody?
There inevitably some issues overlap with county council matters, and I have a personal non-prudential interest as a county councillor for Winchester Westgate.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Scott.
Declare the same as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no others, we'll move on to Chair's announcements. I just wanted to start off by sending my best wishes and hope for a speedy recovery to all of those affected by the terrible bus crash last week. It was a horrible situation. I hope that those affected are recovering speedily. Members may also have heard that Councillor Gottlieb has resigned as a City Councillor, which opens a vacancy for a new Vice Chair for this Town Forum. Do we have any nominations?
I believe Councillor Murphy has offered to stand.
Seconded. Lovely. Thank you. Does anyone, so is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Any vote to the contrary? No. Wonderful. Councillor Murphy, thank you very much. If you could keep an eye on the chat, that would be brilliant, but I think Matthew is doing that as well from this end, so that's very much appreciated. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, the minutes of the last meeting. These are found on pages 5 to 8 of the agenda pack. I move that these minutes be agreed as a true record of that meeting. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Agenda item 5 then, moving swiftly on, public participation. I understand we have 2 requests for public participation this evening, Mr Davies and Ms Beck. Are you both here? Mr Davies, are you present?
I am indeed.
Wonderful. Would you like to start?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. I'd just like to make 1 or 2 observations and questions on the presentations you're due to receive on items 6 and 7. On Monday evening, I heard the very helpful presentation which Steve Tilbury gave on the proposed planning changes, and I assume that we'll have much the same presentation tonight, presumably by Mr Finch or Mr Fox. But specifically dealing with the town area, Monday's presentation covered, of course, the whole district. I wonder if anyone is able to give any indication as to how the proposals for the city eventually zoning, although I don't think they now use that term, which areas to be renewed, which a renewal and which are to be protected, so that I can get some clue and so everyone else can get some clue as to the size of the areas we're going to be talking about. I would like then just to check whether the background papers that have now been produced, again largely dealing with activity or lack of it in the town area, vast quantities of work and money has gone into this over the last year or 2. Are those background documents still going to be relevant under the new regime? I'm thinking particularly of the one I mentioned on Monday about housing, not housing, about shopping and leisure facilities in the whole district. But a lot of them, of course, are in Winchester town. And really on the evidence base for the whole processes leads me really to the vision presentation. I've had 2 helpful discussions with the lead consultant on this, but I remain very concerned about the way that this exercise will or will not fit in to the old planning regime, let alone the new one. And I wonder if any more information can be given on that. In particular, the panels that are being set up to discuss the way forward on the vision, the working groups. I'm surprised and disappointed that the City of Winchester Trust, of which I'm a trustee and an active member, have not been invited, as far as I know, to take part at all. That is despite the fact in the second bullet point on page 31, it talks about engagement, voices from those who have specific or unique insights into city life. And it goes on the next bullet point, including entrepreneurs, community workers, event organisers, activists and local champions. I would have thought the City of Winchester Trust would qualify under numerous headings there. And it is a mystery to us as to why, as far as we know, no individuals have been invited to represent the Trust's views. Now, it talks about 5 groups. It doesn't tell us who the members there are. I don't know if you know or whether Mr. Summers is going to explain more further. But if we, I'm all for involving people who aren't normally involved in this exercise. It does seem to me to throw away the expertise of an organisation like the City of Winchester Trust is a grave mistake. And I would look for some explanation as to what's happening there. Thank you.
Mr. Finch, I don't know if you want to answer some of those questions now or in your presentation.
I'm quite happy if you're happy to take them now whilst they're sort of people's minds. Thank you, Mr. Davis. In terms of zoning, I wouldn't be as bold as to start filling in the map in terms of how we would zone or divide the city between those 3 designations in the white paper, because it's really too early to think about exactly how that would play out for the city. But what is quite clear is that you could expect, Winchester is obviously the most sustainable settlement that we've got in the district. It's well connected, etc. It's experienced quite a lot of growth, as you know, in the past. 4,000 homes in the existing local plan. So I don't think it would be, too much of a leap to think, well, we may see some growth there in terms of defining growth areas. We may also see some renewal, and renewal is interesting. And I'll say a bit more if you'll bear with. I'll do that in the presentation because I'll explain a little bit more about that, because it's a little bit more nuanced than just maybe apparent at the first read of the paper, and we've obviously read it many times. So I think there's some questions to be answered that I probably can't give, and it wouldn't be right for me to speculate on how the city would be zoned. But I'll say a little bit more about that and what the meaning behind those 3 designations is in my presentation. In terms of the value of it, the documents you've referred to, it would depend on exactly which documents. And my colleague, who is the strategic planning manager, Adrian Fox, is with us tonight. Well, he knows far more about the detail than I do. My planning experience I do have, but it's not quite as close to the coalface as it used to be. So he can clarify anything specifically, even outside this meeting, that you wanted clarity on these specific documents. But with any local plan process, we have to make sure that whatever form of plan we take forward, a new style plan is going to have to be heavily evidence-based. And periodically, as you will know, we have to refresh that evidence. So it would rather depend upon the time frame for the plan and the age of the documents in question, but they could still be relevant. But we will always be, a bit like we do with the Sheila, we have to refresh that periodically to see which sites may be available for development. And finally, on the vision, a couple of points on that. In actual fact, I would say that it does fit quite well, or very well actually, with where we will probably be heading with a new style of local plan. The new style of local plan you'll hear me talk about, and you heard it on Monday from Mr. Tilbury. I'll say a little bit more about that, but in actual fact, if ever there was a time to think about the how as well as the what, it's probably now, because what the new system envisages by government is a front loading of that process and getting communities, neighbours, etc. engaged in the planning process, the new local plan, very early on, and therefore in theory simplifying development proposals as you move down the chain towards a planning application, etc. So again, I'll say a little bit more about that. I will say a little bit more as well, but I know Bourne and Summers will say a lot more about how they have looked and selected the 5 working groups with those topics that you've alluded to. I think we were very, very keen to try to reach people and engage with those that don't always or normally engage in the process, and to reach those people. But as you'll also hear from Boyle and Summers a bit later on, there will be opportunity as those work progresses through those 5 themed groups for others to contribute to the work that will eventually feed into those handbook parts 2 that go on to effectively form the basis for the overarching vision for the city for the next 10 years. So I'll say no more than that if I may at that point, Chair, and then I know that Richard and the team will say more about that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Davies, is that okay? Wonderful, thank you. Ms. Beck, are you here? Emma? Is she listed in the participant?
Yes, Chair, yeah.
Sorry, everyone, we're just seeing if Emma Beck is here. She is listed in the participants at the moment.
She's in the meet. She's showing us in the meeting. She's muted, but she's showing us being in the meeting.
Are we able to unmute her?
He's muted. He's unmuted, but we can't hear him.
Can she participate in chat to let us know that she's?
No, she won't be able to.
No. Okay. Perhaps we can give her a call and come back to her later in the agenda.
Carry on with the presentation, and then I'll make some inquiries.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. So we will pause agenda item 5 while we try and get Ms. Beck on the call. So we will move to agenda item 6 in the meantime, the proposed planning reforms, which is being presented. Oh, she's back. We will move back to agenda item 5. Hi, Emma, are you here now?
Obviously, I don't wait. She's unmuted.
She's unmuted.
Yeah, she's unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go back to the presentation, and we'll try and get you in the call, Emma, as soon as we can. So, Mr. Finch, I think you and Mr. Fox are presenting this.
We are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to start with an apology, which I don't normally do, but some of you may have seen this twice or even 3 times before, depending on which councillors we have in attendance tonight. So what I'm hoping to do is, if I can go through reasonably quickly and be a bit lighter on touch, then what we'll do is we can take the questions at the end. And as I alluded to earlier, we'll try and give a bit more of a Winchester flavour to this than we had on Monday and yesterday. Next slide, please, Matthew. Okay, so basically what we're dealing with, we've got 2 consultations which we'll talk about tonight. One is a broad sweeping change to the planning system, which is planning for the future. And we've got to respond to that by the end of October. And we have also a technical document, which is changes to the existing planning system, which we've got a special committee meeting at the end of this month to form our response to. So next slide, please, Matthew. Okay, so just so really, what is the point of this? What is the driver? It's really about boosting growth, particularly around housing delivery, but not exclusively that. The government believes the current system is really 20th century and out of date. It needs to be faster. It needs to be more responsive. It needs to be less expensive to produce, because the system at the moment, local plans take a number of years to produce, and they're aiming to do it much faster than that. And also, by front loading the process and giving even greater weight to development plans, the idea is that it simplifies the planning application process, which will follow on from that. But it isn't just about speeding up and being more efficient. It's also about the beautiful. There's a lot of reference in there to good quality development, and particularly use of things like pattern books. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But I think if I could sum up in 2 words, it's really sort of growth and certainty, increasing the level of certainty within the system. So we'll kick off with planning for the future, which is the broader reforms. So the good news is what you're familiar with. It will be a plan-led system produced by a local planning authority, which will set out the development patterns, etc., and quantum for the next 10 years ahead. So that's quite familiar. But the way in which the plan is made is really where there's going to be some real radical change. It will be a shortened process, 30 months or 42 months, depending on how up to date your plan is when the regulations come into being. It's going to really be subject to different rules and regulations. And as I say, it's really front loading that process to build in far more certainty and to sort out more issues at the plan making stage. So at the moment, we won't be looking at sort of sound or deliverable tests anymore. There's going to be one single test which every local planner have to be able to meet, and that's sustainable development. It looks at a 10-year horizon. As I said, it's looking to be quick. 30 months in planning terms, as you will know from experience, many of you, is not a lot of time. There will be nationally binding housing targets which are handed down from Whitehall, and we'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Development management policies will largely be generic type that you see in a lot of local plans, will be set nationally, and there will be a greater emphasis on master planning and design codes, which can be drawn up at the same time as you make your local plan. So we talked a little bit about it with Mr. Davis's questions. So we've got 3 areas. Now, they don't like, or don't explicitly, I think, use the word zoning, but it's a way of identifying what can go where, basically, in a spatial way. And it's not a new concept. It's used in places like America and on the continent. They're quite used to doing those sorts of local plans. We've got growth areas. That's really where your substantial development would take place. So it could be a new town, it could be a major development area like Kings Barton, or it could be large brownfield sites. So those are where the biggest scale developments would go. Then there's the interesting one, I think the most interesting, and where there probably is the most questions, following up on the question we had from Mr. Davis, are the renewal areas. And I'll say a little bit more about the Winchester City context of that, but those are basically where development is acceptable in principle, but it will not be the major, larger scale developments. It's going to be smaller developments, and also it will be probably divided into sort of sub areas, and you'll need to define what developments within particular parts of an area are suitable for which uses and subject to design criteria in terms of scale, massing and all those sorts of things. Then you've got protected areas, and that's where the most stringent controls are now. So you might imagine, for example, that could be the countryside, the local gaps that we see in the local plan currently, but it doesn't mean no development. It just means that the controls there are far tighter. It advocates extensive use of design codes and briefs to shape the detail in the plan and get those things in earlier. The role of neighbourhood plans, and we've got one, as you will know, in Denmead, is a little bit unclear. It still talks about those, but it's not absolutely clear how they fit in to the new planning system. So growth areas, they would, under the new system, automatically have outline planning permission for the prescribed uses set out in that local plan. There will be parameters about what that might look like, density, etc. You then obtain full permission, would follow on from that in your local plan. A reserved matter application or a different type of application there, like a local development order, is another way of doing it. And it'll be linked to the master plan and design codes I mentioned earlier. Not vastly different to the current approach, but it does give a higher degree of certainty and an even greater weight to what you do when you do your local plan. Renewal areas, yeah, this is consent will be granted through the permission in principle. It could be granted through a full planning application or a local neighbourhood development order, but it really bolsters that presumption in favour of permission. Really, it's talking about ensuring that it's very clear from the outset what type of development is acceptable in which part of the renewal area. And then, as I've said before, we've got protected areas, and they would be subject, rather like now, to full applications. So really not a lot of change in those designated areas. Another interesting change, and this is quite substantial, is how we get infrastructure delivered as part of the planning system. You will probably know, we all know and love Section 106 agreements. They're the legal agreements that can sometimes be quite complicated and go with most planning applications, certainly all the major applications we've got. They are proposed to be removed, and also SIL, which is our local way of getting funding for infrastructure from development, is also going to be replaced by a nationally set infrastructure levy. That would be based on development value. The thresholds and local variation, to ensure developments of marginal viability are not ruled out, so they will set limits there to make sure they don't make developments unviable. It's designed to be more transparent and market responsive because it's based on development value. Interestingly, the payment actually is at the point of occupation, unlike SIL currently where it's at commencement. So there's a big question there that we will be addressing through our response to the local, to the consultation about how quickly we would be seeing that money come through to the council. There's more flexibility. It could, for example, be used for affordable housing. We can't use SIL at the moment, and the parish share, they get 15 or 25% at the moment for SIL. That will remain. So development management, well, I've talked a lot about loading it at the beginning. Proposals clearly designed to reduce the number and type of decisions taken. There are going to be, as I said before, national development management policies. So a lot of the policies that are the more generic ones, which are in many local plans across the country, will generally be set at national level. Government wants more flexibility on repurposing without sort of bureaucratic intervention as it sees it. There will need to be conformity with those design codes or development management policies. And even you could be able to, one of the biggest changes is making these local plans far more interactive. They're going into the digital age, really. So in theory, you may be able to click on where you live or the field next to your house, and it should be able to tell you more or less what development potential there is there, which is going to be, I think, quite interesting. There's mention again of enforcement and compliance work, but there's not a lot of detail and there's not a lot of substantial changes planned in those areas particularly. So that's the broader sweeping picture. So where do we go in the interim? Well, there are changes to the current system, and that's a separate paper which we are responding to, as I said, at a cabinet meeting at the end of this month. It's clearly intended to boost the supply of new homes, and the government proposes to change the standard methodology that we all have to use to generate our housing numbers, with a much greater emphasis on affordability. I'll say a little bit more in a minute, but it's significantly higher housing requirement we're getting for Winchester, and I have to say many other local authorities in Hampshire and beyond, but not all. Some have been adjusted downwards. There is more priority in affordable housing for discounted market sales called first homes, and that obviously has knock-on consequences for other forms of affordable housing, but they're very keen, as you will have seen from other government initiatives, to get people on that first rung, but that can have implications, of course, for other householders and their aspirations. There's also a temporary boost for small and medium businesses in terms of raising the level of when affordable housing is currently requested from 10 units to 40 or 50. And as I say, that's a COVID type measure to support smaller developments and smaller developers. Also greater use potentially of permissions in principle. They've not proved to be particularly popular actually here or in Hampshire, but that's basically, it's a short track process to, at least for a developer to establish that the development of a site for a particular purpose is acceptable in principle, and it gives them the certainty that often enables them to move developments forward in terms of financial commitments and such like. There we can see just a snapshot there. As I say, some of you would have seen this now a few times, but you know that the figure is quite significantly more for us. We're going up, for example, from about 692 to well over 1,025 per annum. And you will also notice there some other councils are in a similar position. Test Valley, East Hampshire, Havant is very interesting, a big increase there of about, was it 91%, which I think they will find a challenge. But there have been some other ones, the bigger cities and bases though, that have seen a reduction in numbers. And that's mainly based around the affordability criteria. And that's something which significantly affects Winchester more, because as we know, Winchester in the district is not the most affordable place to live. So the way they've modified or proposed to change the formula produces us with a significantly bigger figure. And that's something we would have to be able to plan for in the new plan that we're going to develop. And that's just a visual there of those figures. But what I thought I would do, and apologies, I've skipped through that quite quickly, but as I say, some of you will have heard it before, and I'm happy to take questions or for Adrian to help us with that as well. But I thought I could say something a little bit about how that might affect Winchester itself. So all planning authorities now are faced with some difficult choices over timetable for plan making. The annual housing requirement is now in excess of 1,000, I've just outlined, and it was fewer than 700 before. And if that requirement is fixed, and if that's the figure that we are given under the new formula, if that's what the government chooses to introduce, then the development strategy that we have to produce for our new local plan could look very different to what we were thinking it was going to before we had sight of an increased figure. And those changes can be brought in quite quickly because they're really just policy changes rather than legislative changes. So clearly, with Winchester being the most sustainable settlement really within the district, as it's experienced before significant growth, well, we could expect there to be some interesting growth areas as defined under the new plan in and around Winchester. Picking up on that question again, renewal areas. We could expect, it wouldn't be a surprise if a lot of Winchester was in that category, but I do think that there will need to be almost sort of sub areas or subcategories within that renewal to say what is acceptable in particular areas. And by way of an example, what might be acceptable in a neighbourhood like St Cross or Stanmore could be very different to what would be acceptable in a more or partly more industrialised area like Winnell. And that's really where some of the nuance and subtlety of the plan making process is going to need to be defined. And at the moment, there's not a lot of detail provided by government on that. Clearly, raising that threshold even temporarily in terms of the threshold for affordable units, that could have a significant impact in the shorter term, because we do get a number of developments that come forward, particularly within Winchester. Could be redevelopment, could be infilling, which produces a small contribution towards affordable housing. If the threshold is increased, then that may no longer be the case. Again, as I mentioned earlier, focus on first homes, well, that could certainly impact on other affordable housing tenures, and also the wider use of permissions and principles, particularly in areas perhaps like the town centre or some of the outlying areas around the town centre. That's a fast track process. You don't get a lot of detail, as a result of which, whether people think that's the best way to deal with those, what could be quite significant development proposals, is something which people would want to debate, I suspect, because you won't get any of the detail up front, but you will get a permission in principle. What decision-making legislative path will the government follow? Will it stick to the proposals if there are widespread criticism? Well, we don't know. I think we can safely say it's certainly captured people's attentions, whether it's members of the public, politicians, etc. And we don't know, but what we do know is they are very serious about the intent to reform the wider system, as well as to making shorter term changes. So we don't know, but we can't assume there will be changes. We have to start thinking now that is clearly the stated intention. When will we have enough certainty to produce meaningful and purposeful options to start on a new plan? Well, again, we need to see what comes out of the consultation on that. What we do know is that those numbers stay as they are currently proposed, then clearly we're going to have to think again about what development strategy is right for Winchester and for the wider district. And we need to think about as well the role of our partners in Push, for example. As you know, they do a lot of work which we're a part of along the Solent area. Our southern parish is part of the district. So I apologise, there is a whistle through. There is a lot in there, but I'm more than happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I believe we have Ms. Beck again. Are you there? I know you have a question on this particular presentation, so it is relevant if you can ask it first.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you. I've never had that problem before. I'm not quite sure what it was, but my microphone wasn't working. Anyway, thank you for bearing with me. And thank you for coming back to me, Chair. I really appreciate that. I wanted to make some points that I made also at the local plan advisory group meeting on Monday. So apologies for the repetition for those who were there. But it's really just highlighting some concerns that I have around the proposed new planning laws and their implications for publicly accessible open space. And I think, we all saw the importance of publicly accessible open space during the COVID-19 lockdown, because that was often the only place that people could go to get some respite. And I think even since lockdown, people are trying to gather in a socially distanced fashion, and they're often doing that in our sports grounds, recreation grounds, parks, and informal areas of open space as well. But the COVID-19 recovery emphasis is on build, as we know, and the dramatic changes to the planning policy that have been proposed by the government could put open space under serious pressure. And I see that today the wildlife trusts have issued a report outlining some of their concerns in relation to the impact on open space that supports wildlife and biodiversity. I've had a look through the government's Planning for the Future consultation website and noted that there were some references to green space, but those really seem to denote private gardens in a lot of instances rather than the public realm. I could only find 2 references to open space specifically and no references to sports and recreation at all. So my concern really is what that means for Winchester, where we've got a few publicly accessible open spaces in the town itself, but they're fairly small, and only a few of those have some limited forms of protection. All our main public sports pitches and recreation grounds, and actually many of the informal open spaces that people enjoy as well, sit just outside the settlement boundary currently. And the reason why they've remained relatively unthreatened hitherto is because they're designated as countryside. Obviously, with the new zoning, we don't know what that might mean. We've only got one set of playing fields in the town at the moment, King George V and Highcliffe, which are legally protected. And it sounds as if some similar protection is in train for the neighbouring Garrison ground, but not complete yet. So my question really is what we might need to do to get on the front foot with respect to the changes in the planning laws, and whether or not the town forum members might consider looking at areas of open space both within and just outside the current settlement boundary that need to have some more significant protection placed on them now. As Simon has just outlined in his presentation, the term protected in the government's consultation documents doesn't really sound like protection, actually. It means that people have to bring forward a planning application. It's not clear that it offers any more protection than that. So it's really just a plea to Town Forum to look at how Winchester City Council's own open space might be protected, to support community efforts to protect other areas of open space that the council doesn't own, and to think through what we can all do together to ensure that both in the immediate and longer term, we've got spaces where people can go that are publicly accessible. And then I just wanted to sort of follow on very quickly with another point which is related, which I noticed that you've got the budget before you tonight, and then at your next meeting I think you're going to be considering the playing area strategy, or at least the programme for repairing and upgrading play areas. I just wanted to put in a plea to have play areas for older children and teenagers considered as well. I know the emphasis up until now has been very much on play areas for younger children. We've got a real lack of multi-use games areas, you know, outdoor courts and other things that are designed more for older children, indeed adults, to enjoy. So I'd really welcome those being added into the play area programme if that's feasible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Finch, did you want to respond to some of the planning questions?
Yeah, more than happy to. And yes, I remember Ms. Back raised those points very well on Monday. I think I understand the concern, and I would absolutely agree, particularly as, you know, within my remit, managing open spaces is something we do, and we all saw the value, the tremendous value of those spaces during certainly with what we've been through the last 6 months. I think, to be honest, whilst I said protected areas doesn't mean no development, I think there will be areas and it could include valuable areas of open space that we could look to define. I think what we're going to have to do is get some colouring pencils out basically when we make these new style of local plans. But I do think that areas like that, open space, whether they be playing pitches, informal open space, play areas, are certainly things which currently are protected, and I don't think it would be a big leap to think that they will be protected under the new system. And I don't read or infer from the government consultation that there's necessarily going to be particular expectations to release those areas. The other thing is, of course, unlike some of our colleagues, particularly along the south coast, Winchester is quite a large district, and it does potentially have other options, in terms of planned expansion. And I say we don't know the quantity, and I'm not going to jump ahead to that. So I think we're probably in a better place than some who really are going to feel that pressure when they have got many more constrained areas than we have. But absolutely agree, something that will clearly be at the heart of everything we're going to do with the new plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I just wanted to add, we do have an informal planning group as part of the town forum, so maybe the outdoor spaces is an issue that group can look at as well. In respect of the play areas, yes, I agree. You may have seen in respect of the vision, one of the working groups that has been specifically set up is for teenage girls, because I think it is recognised that there is very little by way of provision for recreation for teenage girls. So we are looking at that, but I do note your concerns on that, so thank you. We do have a question from Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points for Simon, really. Moving forward on this sort of newness of a plan coming through via the sort of government shake-up, really, one of the key factors that always is a stumbling block for the planning committee is viability, when schemes come through and the developers actually suddenly do a backtrack on affordability, and quite often it's a stumbling block, and many times the planning committee has raised that over concerns about the lack of contributions coming from developers. Just wanted to know how that would fit in. And at the same time, as the administration also on an action point, which I concur with, is we also want to, as a council, build communities, not just houses. So I want to know what the steer in regards to the administration's drive about actually building infrastructure and communities rather than just houses and all that sort of stuff, and how that would fit into this new thinking about the plan coming forward. And then such as the sort of pretty out of date now Stanwell planning framework work for the master plan for areas like that, and same with Winnell as well, how would that feed into the new process? Because communities like Stanwell, Winnell, probably Highcliffe and whatever are well overdue to be looked at again, and hopefully that would feed into the process as well. Thanks.
I'll answer two of the three questions, Chair, but not the other one. Which are those? The first one about affordability, yes, I mean, Councillor Scott, we've all sat through many planning committees where that's been debated long and hard. I think it really goes back to what I said earlier in terms of trying to get all of this sorted before you get to the planning application stage. What the government is looking to do is basically, by the time that application, whatever form it comes in, those issues have been resolved, because what they're looking to do is they fear, I think the perception is there's too much debate, assessment, interference, whatever you want to call it. There's not, I think that's their perception when you get to the application stage. So the idea with this is to sort all those things out, and therefore effectively you would see a streamlined decision-making process, because you would have an infrastructure levy that will be set nationally. And with viability built into that as an adjustment, so that could affect the money that we end up receiving. So that will be something there. So I think basically it's, rather than having those debates at that point in the process, they're trying to remove it and move it forward. So by the time the application comes in, there is no debate about the provision for affordable housing. And basically you will be able to use infrastructure levy for that, which at the moment, of course, as you know, you can't use SIL for that. So I think that's about front loading it. In terms of frameworks, and this goes on to what you're going to hear with the next item, actually, with the vision. And I might actually ask Adrian, if that's all right, Chair, to contribute. We see, I think the government sees a far greater role actually for just those sorts of documents, and that's where we are going to need to engage with the communities right at the start of that new plan making process. But I've probably said enough already, so can we ask if Adrian Fox might want to contribute? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Fox, you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Yeah, just picking up on Simon's point, I do think, obviously, if we've got to designate and zone the whole of the district, which is obviously a very large district, we're going to need that help and support from local communities who obviously know their communities very, very well, and the land obviously around them. And that involves obviously training our officers internally, but also training obviously with obviously members like yourselves, parish councils, to kind of empower them to basically do it on a consistent approach, because that's the key thing, is that we need a consistent approach across the whole of the district. So I do think, obviously, a first quick exercise we're going to do, we're not starting with a blank piece of paper, because we've got a lot of frameworks, as you mentioned. We've got for the MDAs, we've got design codes, we've got some village design statements, we've got conservation area appraisals, albeit some of them are a bit long in the tooth. So we're starting with some information, and there's some parts of the district where we don't know anything, so we're starting again. But what we've got to do is tailor them to the new system, and obviously, like I say, make it more visual. It's very much a plan, a visual document, more so than anything before. But yes, we want people to come on this journey with us. It's really important. Thank you, Chair.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor, can we just scroll up
Yes,
so I can see? Sorry, I think Councillor Mather, I think you were next.
Yes, Emma Back's point is well made, not only in relation to sports pitches, but to informal leisure space. And it was very possible to see that during lockdown, where all areas of kind of informal leisure space on my side of Winchester were really packed. I mean, it was actually getting quite difficult to socially distance on St Catherine's Hill. More and more houses are being built with no garden or tiny gardens. I mean, one of my concerns is that this is a policy with its increase of 48% in the requirement for housing in Winchester, that is just sort of, let's look at overheated areas and make them kind of more overheated. So because lots of people want to move into the southeast, and especially attractive cathedral cities like Winchester, let's kind of respond to that and just build more houses there and overheat them even more. And it's a sort of it's an inadequate answer to having a probably more effective regional policy. And what are we going to do to challenge just the basic premise of this, you know, affordability? Therefore, you have to have the requirement for housing put up by 48%. What are we going to do just to challenge those figures? Or is everyone just prepared to kind of sit back and accept them? Because actually, when Winchester comes top in tables of cities, expensive cities, it's because it's a rare example of a city in the south. Almost all the cities are in the north of England. If you actually wanted to produce a list of affordability and towns in the south of England, it will come in a very, very, very different place. I mean, areas closer to London are much, much, much more expensive. And what are we going to do to challenge these figures? Not everyone is going to be happy with them. Lots of people in my ward won't be in the slightest bit happy with them if we just sit back and accept them.
Yeah, Mr. Flint, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. We talked a little bit about this yesterday evening, actually, and it was really useful yesterday with the briefing for members, because there was a lot of good suggestions coming out across the questions, actually, that we can use, Councillor Mather, for just that in terms. And one of the ones that we talked about quite a lot last night was the formula and how it's proposed to be adjusted to produce that 48% figure that you've just quoted there, which is to do with things like affordability, and obviously got things on the doorstep like the National Park, which is 40% of the district. So when we respond, we are going to be looking very closely at how that formula works in the context of a place like Winchester, which is why it is producing such a significant increase, as you've just said there. And there are issues around that, and that was, as I say, came out of the discussions last night. So clearly, you know, I can't exactly tell you, exactly what we're going to say in response, but rest assured that's one of the key things, that the message coming through loud and clear is that we need to look very, very closely at how that is, and in our response back to government about how fair we think that is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kresk, you are next.
Thanks, Chair. I've made this point previously, but the more I hear from Simon and others, and the more I read, the more I want to just make sure it's heard. I'm not convinced about the paper and what it's going to achieve, if it's going to achieve the intention and the objectives from the government. I think if we look at Barton Farm, for example, that was effectively outline planning permission from the government. The government agreed the S106 contributions, so effectively took on a government levy, if you like, or negotiated that at least. So it's a very similar model to what's proposed, I believe, but certainly it's not delivered the housing that was imagined. You know, it was imagined for 2,000 homes. We don't have those 2,000 homes. It's been hampered by infrastructure development. So if that's going to be the model of the future under growth areas, I think it's important to make that known to the government as that is a potential of what they're planning. So that's a question I'll continually ask in terms of if that's something that people agree with, and if that's a representation we can make as part of the submissions. But another question that came up to me is, what does this mean for how things are going to change in terms of representations? At the moment, we have planning committees, people can put in objections to development, and then there's a voice for people at planning committees on individual objections. What's the role of the planning committee going forward, do we imagine, and people be able to comment on individual applications?
Mr. Finch.
Yes, I have two good questions there, I think. Or a statement and a question, but no, I think actually Councillor Crask, again, this, as you know, came out yesterday, and there was a lot of feedback yesterday about the rate at which developers build out, over which the councils have very or no control. And as I said yesterday, there was a previous consultation, I can't think what it was on SIL or something a few years ago, where that government actually did try to tackle or look at ways to tackle that problem, which is difficult in terms of incentivising them to build faster. But absolutely, it's something. It's one thing granting more planning permissions for more houses, but on its own, does that equate to more housing? Well, you know, records suggest perhaps that is not always the case, and you've quoted Kings Barton there as an example. Decision making, this is my opinion, my own opinion interpretation. I think the government is concerned about the amount of assessment, analysis, decision making that goes on at the application stage. So as I said at the beginning, in their review, to speed that up, I think, you know, it's going to come all down to that getting in at that local plan point, and thereafter the presumption is going to be very, very much in favour of development, and it will strip away some of perhaps the analysis that that happens at planning committee and other places at the moment. So I think, to be fair, the implication is that it's all front loaded, and by the time you get to your application, unless there's something really wrong with the application, it doesn't meet the plan, which will be potentially a lot more detailed than it is now, it will have permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Todd, you have a question.
I've got two questions. One is design codes, which aren't things I really know very much about. So anything you could say to say exactly what they are. And since they're a new thing, I don't know if they're just new to us or new to the system generally. I mean, are there going to be enough people nationally or who know how to do these? And are we going to need new people to do this? Because it's not something I remember us doing before. So that's a question about design codes. And then the other one is about these 10,000 houses. So as I understand it, from also having had a go at the calculation, 10,000 houses is the 10,000 extra houses are calculated, which is 1,000 a year for 10 years, is calculated for the whole district. But we've got the South Downs National Park, which, as you said, is 40% of the district where not much seems to get built. And now we've got Cpre Hampshire, who are proposing a South Hampshire Greenbelt that covers almost all the rest of the district, right up to the southern border of Winchester. So if both of these happen, would this mean that 10,000 houses have to be built in Winchester and to the north and west of Winchester?
Thank you, Councillor Todd. That was going to be my question as well.
Crikey. Where do I start with that? Oh, again, good questions, aren't they? Okay, design codes, I'll start with a simple one first, and I might defer to my learned colleague on the housing numbers a little bit. But yeah, design codes, actually, they're not a new concept. We've had them before. In fact, actually, I was sort of involved in them down at West of Waterlooville on the major development area that they've been building out there now for a number of years. So the idea of those is by no means new at all, and they are used. And I think there's one at North Whiteley, and I think I'm not even sure there might be one at Kings Barton, but I'm not familiar with the details of that planning permission. But basically, no, they're not a new concept. You need skills to do that, and so we would have to have a look at that. But planners, urban designers can deal with design codes. I say I've dealt with design codes in the past, and really what they do in very, very simple terms is set a design framework and parameters for the development, and that's where the certainty comes in. So in other words, you do more detail at the outset of the planning, at the plan making stage. So when your planning application comes in, you know, a year or 2, 3 years down the line, and it conforms with that design code in terms of design, massing, the scale, the layout, the densities, all those things that we all familiar with when you sit through planning committee, then effectively, you know, you will get planning permission. So that's how those work. It's really a framework, if you like, for decision making based around design in all of its facets, really. In terms of the housing number, then what I think I'll do is I'll ask Adrian just to comment a little bit on that, and I'll come back in if I need to. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to make a very clear distinction that the two consultation documents, the first consultation document, which is proposed changes to the current planning system, is suggesting the 1,024, 1,025 figure per year for Winchester. As Simon has indicated, obviously we will be challenging that kind of assumption and obviously the kind of workings behind that. In the white paper, which is obviously a separate consultation, they are saying that national constraints could be taken into account to reduce that figure. But there's no detail on that process in terms of how that is taken about, what kind of transparent process is going to be to kind of how we can input into that process. So, you know, is it the South Downs National Park? Is it flood risk areas? Is it Ramsay sites? So there is no detail at the moment on that. In terms of obviously where that leaves us, the figure is for our district, and at the moment obviously that includes the South Downs National Park, which I fully appreciate. Obviously we've got no planning control on, but we will be making very much a strong point that obviously we have got the South Downs National Park and we are in constant dialogue with them. And the other night, helpfully, Therese updated us on discussions with the South Downs National Park. But like I say, it's very clear to make that distinction that the first consultation document is suggesting obviously a change to the standard methodology, which is the 1,024, and it's in the second document that obviously it's suggesting that national constraints could be taken into account, but no detail. And obviously with the second consultation, it is saying that's a binding figure, and that is very important because you can't go above it and you can't go below it, and that's a very important distinction that I think members need to be aware of. Now, whether or not tactically the government has split the two consultations like that, I'm not going to comment, but like I say, I'll stop there. Thank you.
And just for clarification, what about the CPRE's proposed greenbelt, which if you look at the map they have, comes right up to the south of Winchester and covers the whole of the rest of the south of the district? I mean, if we had a greenbelt as well as the South Downs National Park, would that mean the 10,000 houses go into Winchester and to the north and west of Winchester?
As I've indicated, there is no kind of guidance on whether or not Greenbelt is obviously one of those designations, because clearly, obviously in London, where they've got Greenbelt, there'll be lots of other local authorities who, for example, I know Sevenoaks very well, only because I'm from Kent, but obviously they've got 94% Greenbelt. Now, obviously, if everybody says that they've got national kind of constraints, the government is not going to hit that 300,000 homes a year, which is obviously the fundamental driver of both consultation documents. Clearly, if obviously there was obviously a greenbelt towards the south of Winchester, and I won't go into the merits or otherwise of that, and the South Downs National Park, the implications is, as you quite rightly say, there is only other parts of the district that we can go. So like I say, it is one reason why obviously to be cautious about promoting that kind of idea at this stage, because it could have implications.
it's a difficult one. We know what the aspiration is of the Cpre, and obviously Push is doing work on that, and we're a member of Push. So and you know that's something that's very much on our horizon because of that. All I would add really to what Adrian has said there is that there haven't been any new green belts for quite some time, and the bar set by government is a high one. And as Adrian's alluded to there, I mean, clearly there's a big growth agenda with these changes. So I wonder how a green belt would fare in terms of getting, because you have to designate it through your local plans. And that'd be plural in this case because it would affect more than just Winchester district. And also it would depend how the green belt works, because you have to look at a longer time horizon, as I understand it, for green belts. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if you did go down that route, all of the areas shaded green at the bottom would have no green. It may be that those areas, the extent of the green areas, may have to be less if we were saying there needs to be some growth accommodated within the Solent area where the green belt's being proposed, and then the rest of it would become green belt drawn around it, and you get your pen out and colour around it. So it's actually, I'll be honest with you, and planners always say this, it is quite complicated. But as we said, yeah, because it's complicated, it needs a lot of very careful consideration as to what the intended consequences are and possibly what unintended consequences might be. So we'll certainly be giving that some very careful consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Hutchison, you've got a comment in the chat. Do you want to make that for those people who are watching the stream or listening to the audio?
Yes, I'd just like to make sort of one comment really, which is slightly different, and that is that when we started the vision process, which we will be talking about at the next item on the agenda, it was very much seen as the precursor to a plan for Winchester. And this whole process, I think, and if we follow this process with the level of engagement which we want to do, is something that will help in that particular direction. But I wanted to make it sort of follow on from something that Councillor Mather said about challenging the government. And it, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why Winchester is being asked to take very much more housing and other parts are taking less housing is because it's, to me, it's based on a false premise. It's based on the premise that there's a lot of demand in Winchester and prices will fall if you increase the numbers of homes. Well, there's lots of evidence countrywide that actually prices don't fall where you necessarily increase homes, and what will, in a sense, almost certainly happen is that we'll get more people coming from London. But that's a slightly different issue. But I just think that when looking at the numbers, and if we are going to be making a challenge, that's quite an important point to be raising. But I do hope very much that, as I say, this process that we've in a sense begun in Winchester Town with the vision will lead to the next stage. And if we can do that well, there is the potential for certainly for engaging and for seeing this process through. Thank you.
Lerney, you've got a question.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to this issue around design codes. As we know, one of the charms of Winchester is actually its variety, rather than being something like Bath, which kind of where part of its charm is its homogeneity, if you like. Interestingly, I was at a seminar about this subject the other day where one developer was saying that these design codes were great if you wanted to produce identikit houses, you know, and he was pointing to the Essex design code in particular, which has been in place for some time. But where you were talking about more complicated forms of development, it was actually disastrous. You know, I'm really worried that we won't be able to develop a sensible design code for Winchester, which doesn't make it too easy to go down the identikit route rather than having houses which genuinely reflect their context. And the other area I'm concerned about with design codes is that they do tend to be backward looking, whereas actually we're moving into a world of zero carbon homes where we may be looking for homes which look very different to today's. So I wondered if officers had any comments about the design code issue.
Mr. Finch.
Okay, thank you. Well, if I go first, and Adrian might want to add to it. As I say, that as I explained, well, not a new concept. I think some architects, are going to be responding along just those lines. They will see it as unduly constrictive and very prescriptive in terms of what you do. To some degree, I think I understand that concern actually, but to some degree it's how you do that, and that's why when I was talking before about there could be all sorts of things under headed of renewal, because what renewal means in Winnell, it will not necessarily mean the same in the middle of the city to the same as St Cross, because they're completely different character areas entirely with different uses. So it may mean, but I think there's going to be a lot of work in there if you're going to come up with things which are going to deliver what you want, as Councillor Lerner said, in terms of quality. Adrian, I don't know if you've got a comment on that, but I think I can understand the concern about it being overly prescriptive to produce one sort of outcome. Thanks.
If perhaps I could add to that, Chair. I do agree. I think sometimes, obviously, design codes are very good. They work very well. But obviously, in terms of innovation, particularly, how do you craft a design code that picks up on those very issues about climate change and adaptation? And that's where, obviously, we need to do a lot of thinking about how we actually do that. There is no guidance from the government about how you actually do that. There was overarching support at the LPAG meeting on Monday for the council to put themselves forward as a pilot authority, which we as officers fully endorse, because I think there is a great learning opportunity from our peers, and obviously trying to shape and inform this process, because there's no detail on that. And that's one that I am particularly keen on, to make sure that we are not just looking kind of backwards, we are looking forward. Obviously, there's some great things we can learn from the past, but we should be looking forward. And obviously, the way that we live as a result of COVID-19 has changed, obviously, our type of housing that we want, the layout, the open spaces, which has been touched on. So yes, it's going to require a new kind of mindset, a new kind of skill set to actually come up with something that actually is responsive for, you know, kind of the 21st century. Thank you.
One more question. It is 7:10 now. I had one quick question, and then Liz, if your question is quite short, then we can squeeze it in. My question was that I come from a planning background in New Zealand, and what is proposed here looks very much like a New Zealand style district local plan. But the difference in New Zealand is that planning and environmental permitting, it's a combined system. What sort of consideration for environment is there included in this proposal?
Yes, I'm aware of, actually, when a long time ago, when I did my planning diploma in another life, we looked at other systems, one of which was France and Holland and other places where they almost go down to street by street level about what's acceptable. It's that granular. It is
street by street.
Yeah. So, but whether that would work in the British context, particularly in larger cities and much larger than Winchester, I'm not so sure how easy that would be. I don't think, to be fair, the government's intention is to sort of water down environmental considerations. Where it doesn't say much, which I think everybody's picked up on, is the climate emergency and change. And that was really a part of the last question, actually, about how you would deal with that in terms of context of a design code, for example, and national policy. And I think a lot of that will be set nationally. So I think there's still a sustainability test in there, which replaces the other test you've got to do to get your plan over the line at the moment. So I don't necessarily think there's a watering down of that. And there's a lot of environmental consideration currently at the moment. But of course, that is at the moment to some degree a legacy of being in the EU, because of course a lot of the directives originate and are enacted locally by the UK government. But the government has said, you know, it's not a race to the bottom. They have said that they will look to keep in those broader controls and regulations. So I think you have to watch this space. But I don't get the impression from the planning white paper there is a watering down necessarily of protecting the environment, but the proof will be in the pudding, basically.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison, did you have one very quick question?
Well, it's a very quick comment. I will be very quick, because I appreciate you moving on. And I think to some extent Adrian Fox has answered the question, but I just wanted to remind people that in the last local plan, Winchester, unlike a lot of the smaller settlements, didn't have any form of design statement. So I think we've really got an opportunity now, as part of this paper, to work on this, and I hope very much this will be embedded in our work that we see, the programme of work for the next phase.
Further questions? I know some people are having difficulty with their chat, so if you are, turn on your camera and then we should be able to see you. But if there are no further questions, we'll thank Mr. Finch and Mr. Fox very much for that presentation. I know they can probably give it in their sleep now. The next presentation we have is going to be given by Richard Summers from the consultants Boyle and Summers, who have been engaged by the Town Forum to prepare the vision for Winchester. So are you there, Richard?
I am, yes. Yes.
Hello.
I'm just conscious. Hi, you all right?
Yes, good, thank you.
Good.
So the slides of this presentation should have been circulated to everyone on the 15th. I think they're in the supplementary agenda. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Matthew? So you should all have copies of them.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much for inviting us to present to you and talk to you this evening. Richard Eastham, my colleague, is going to share the presentation with me, and he's just shared the screen there as well. So that's our opening slide, and I'll ask Richard to click through them as we go. We're obviously with a visioning team that have been working with various people throughout the city since March. The names you see in front of you there are the 5 principal members of the team, but there are others within each organisation. I'm Richard Summers. I'm a master planner. Timo Peach from Momozo is a creative and storyteller principally. Laura Mulhern is our digital marketeer, so she's been dealing with the social media side of life. Richard Eastham, who would speak later, is an urbanist and a community engagement specialist, and Jenny Savage from the same company is also adds to that list of specialisms, her previous life as an artist. So 4 companies, 5 principals, and we'll come across those names again later on. And if you can just click through to the next slide, Richard. Oh, perfect. Okay, so this is the brief that was in the tender documents that we responded to at the beginning of the year or turn of the year. I just want to pick, obviously not going to read these slides out. It's all there for you to read yourselves, but it was the last line that particularly caught our eye in terms of the question being, what does Winchester want? And as we'll see as we go through the presentation, what we found progressively, it was partly what did Winchester want, but it was more a question of how was it going to deliver anything, what was it going to get what it wanted. Richard, if you could move on. Thank you. So this evening in the presentation, we will go through these 3 points. We'll update you on our main research findings and explain how these will inform the final stages of the project. Conscious that we haven't presented to this group since March. Obviously, there's been a certain kind of crisis nationally or internationally that's prevented us doing that, but it's also prevented us doing all sorts of things that we had hoped to be doing through the middle of the year, and we've changed tack and responded in a different way. Point 2, the timeline from now we'll run through, but essentially we have a working group sessions set up for the middle of next week, and we're looking to conclude this the majority of our work on the vision by the end of October, with the aim being that we can present to you in the middle of November at your next Town Forum meeting. And the third point there, we will obviously be collating everything and pulling everything together at the conclusion of our commission, well before the end of the year, so that the council has something to progress with. Richard, if you could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I touched on, obviously, March the 19th, we presented to the members. We said we were going to do all sorts of things, most of which involved meeting people in real life, in social spaces, in the kind of typical community engagement forum that you would expect. But instead, we've been forced to work largely online. Many of you, both members, officers and other people within Winchester will have spoken to us or engaged with us in all sorts of ways. We've done since March over 70 interviews, and we're still picking off one or two people, stragglers in those that we wanted to speak to. We also did manage to get some kind of on-site, if you like, engagement in the streets and parks and neighbourhoods of Winchester, but clearly not as much as we hoped. And the majority of our engagement has been online through the website One Great Win. I've got one or two stats that Laura's provided for me to just highlight. We've got almost 1,800 unique users who visited the website, which obviously feels like a pretty substantial number. And we've an additional 55 unique users to the website since the beginning of September. So the interest in the One Great Win website continues, and actually has been boosted in this recent current month. 872 people have listened to the audio clips on the website, which have been quite engaging and which are sort of product of Jenny's work. We're obviously on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as well. And in terms of Twitter, Laura tells me this is an impressive stat. 2.4% is our engagement, which obviously sounds very low, but in terms of what the expectations of are in the marketing world, if you get 0.5 engagement, that's pretty good. If you get more than 1, you've got a great response. So 2.4 is a terrific tribute, really, in large part to Laura's efforts. And what we're hoping to do in the next month, or couple of months actually, is seek ways in which we can plug in to some more of the council's own social networks and online platforms and website and so on, and see whether we can actually project and increase those figures even more. Richard, if you could move on to the next slide. So this was our key finding. It's a pretty simple graphic. It's essentially summarizes what the overall picture was in terms of our engagement to date. And in terms of a kind of a straw poll based on those engagements, particularly with the interviews, our finding was that around about 4 out of 5 people were more interested in how things were going to be improved, how things were going to be delivered, than the what was going to be delivered. I think there was widespread agreement in terms of what needs doing, but there was a great deal of frustration with expressed in terms of the kind of lack of delivery of that, and that's I think a fairly widespread feeling across the country, but it does seem to be particularly acute in Winchester. Richard, if you can move on to the next one. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but if you can focus on those two very different kind of pathways going top of the slide to the bottom of the slide. What we've been told, this is the green or very dark green blobs. The feeling was that there was a great deal of work that's being done in Winchester, both within the council and within local groups, interested bodies, even within private companies as interested observers. And there was a great deal of studies and ideas being generated, but there was an equal amount of confusion really that was generated in terms of the responses, and there were some difficulties really in coming to conclusions and following through to delivery on a great number of projects. And there are obviously 1 or 2 very high profile ones that you'll all know very well. So So from that, that was one of, in terms of the 80% that referred to on the previous slide, that was a lot of what people were telling us and talking to us about under that heading. I can hand over to Richard. He'll talk about the pile of orange rectangles on the right hand side.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, the green ones are sort of the process that's been described to us many times through the research, that Winchester sort of bumps through different processes that don't give a satisfactory sort of outcome, that lack of action. But on the right here, what we're saying here, the city vision that we've been working on is going to be a platform for the next decade. It's a sort of an overarching document. It's strategic in nature. We're preparing it through this a deep and wide engagement to understand what's happening across the city. And that recurring message was about that lack of forward momentum. So we've reached the point now where we're about to launch these working groups, which we'll describe in more detail. And they're going to share knowledge and share collaborative techniques. And what we want to get out of that is a newfound spirit of collaboration to emerge, so that you have an action plan about how you deliver things across the city. Not what you deliver, as Richard's just said, but it's about the mechanisms by which you can get from a certain point in the evolution of the city to where it needs to be next. And there's a sort of deadlock or an impasse that seems to occur in Winchester that the working groups want to try and unlock and come up with ways to make things happen in Winchester that perhaps haven't happened before. These might be quite small projects in the first instance, but we want the working groups to think ambitiously about where this might lead to, this idea of a new way of collaboration. So this slide summarises what has been described to us and why we want to take it next. And sorry, you go on, Richard.
I was just going to talk sort of briefly about the subject matter that we've got within these 5 target groups. You see on the top right, the name is very distinctly about targets. It's about delivery, it's about action, forward momentum, as Richard says, and rather than themes, which can be sound rather static and the classic sort of report that sits on a shelf. So lifetimes covers kind of lifelong learning, but also the recurring theme about graduate retention, about that kind of demographic hole within the city, which I think that you're all very keenly aware of, and other subjects as well, like how children are catered for. I'm sure Liz Hutchison will know of this. There's a very a series of sort of astute observations about cities being built for children being the best cities, if you like. I've not summarised that very well, but if you target or think about a child's relationship to a city, then it inherently leads you to a series of the right decisions. And just to sort of as a side note to that, you'll have spotted on the website that there's one of the posts, one of the blogs includes a video of a small child walking through Winchester, which was produced by a very helpful contributor to the website. Home is a little bit more straightforward in a way, although we're trying not to focus exclusively on how to build more houses in Winchester. Obviously, you just talked about that at length, and you know about that. It is a key issue, but also there are key issues around neighbourhoods and about facilities and amenities within neighbourhoods. Emma Back was talking earlier on about public open spaces and the pressures on that, but clearly we know there are lots of other things that people need within their neighbourhoods, which we'll look to talk about in that and come up with techniques and solutions to in that working group. And I'll just end by talking about the ecology group. This is a name which is a catch-all, really. It's a holistic approach, a holistic view of Winchester, which encompasses both the built and natural environment. We've come across, and I'm sure you may have, documents and particularly local plans that deal with either the built environment or rather deal with the built environment as separate from the natural environment, landscape and biodiversity. And our sense was that, particularly in Winchester, because of the setting of it being in a green bowl, the views of that green bowl from within the heritage core of the city, that they were inherently linked, that they were indistinguishable from one another. So that's the kind of subject of that group. And I'll leave Richard to talk about culture.
The culture group is obviously about the expression, the arts, the creative nature of music, theatre, drama, heritage, architecture and so on. But it's also about how culture expresses itself across the city, and that includes sport and recreation and leisure time as well. And that group will look at how culture maybe does express itself at the moment, but maybe where there's cultural activity is perhaps not being given the showcase or the platform it needs in the city, and all ranges of cultures from different backgrounds as well. So that's going to be an interesting one about how it links to things like the streets and spaces and the buildings, and why culture can be found in Winchester. And then the final group is called movement, and it's about transport and travel and the choices we make about how we get around. But also in that group, we've introduced the idea of well-being, both mental health issues, physical health issues, the agenda about obesity, about loneliness, about access to green space, and those combined issues often linked to if we've chosen to walk, or if we've chosen to cycle, or we've chosen to sit in a car, which maybe gets stuck in congestion and leads to stress and so on. So the movement group has, again, it's broader topics, and what we've tried to do across these 5 groups, as Richard said, is not go down the usual route of local plan chapters, but try and create a holistic, integrated approach so that the vision touches on the areas that we need to. In terms of the facilitation of the groups, the names mentioned at the start, Richard Summers will be facilitating the home group, Jenny Savage, the Lifetimes group, number 1, Timo Peach is leading on the ecology group, Laura Mulhern culture, and myself, Richard Easton, will be facilitating the movement group. And those 5 groups will be starting work next week.
Just before you move on, Richard, just wanted to make one point, which I think people will have seen if they before, but I just wanted to remake it, that none of the groups are clearly called economic development, and equally nobody felt that it was worthwhile having a distinct group about sustainability. The point being that they are broad, overarching targets which run through all of those groups, and so we felt that rather than isolate them, we would emphasise them in all of the groups.
Good point. Yeah. So why the working group approach? Well, we were encouraged from the very first meeting with the team at the town forum and the council about giving a voice to those that wouldn't normally contribute to this sort of initiative. And therefore, throughout all our engagements, we've been looking for those voices that have a specific or unique insight, and we've included in the group's public, private, voluntary sectors and so on, event organised activists, local champions that we think have a dynamic or a characteristic that they can collaborate and share across the working groups. And we've now got these groups broadly assembled. We're still, as we run up to the start of that, there's obviously some people still to confirm, and we've been chasing emails today, and I'm sure we will be doing tomorrow, but we think we've got the quorum that we need to have a productive session across those 5 groups. And this little quote, just to break up our slideshow, Jane Jacobs, designing a dream city is easy, rebuilding a living one takes imagination, and the people that make up the working groups, we believe, are the ones with the imagination to do that. So there is no blank sheet, there rarely is, but Winchester's got a very long, deep and a very important heritage that we're building on. So this is a point where there's about a reimagination and imaginative ideas that can take hold in Winchester. So how do the groups work? This is a really important first point. We had quite a few people that we approached that were resistant to joining a working group on the basis that it may be yet another talking shop. And several individuals said they'll only take part if it's going to be an action-based workshop. They said, we've sat through things like this in Winchester before and nothing ever happened as a result. So that in a way was very telling. It was part of the evidence base that this type of working group needs to take a different approach to action and not just more words. And therefore, the second point here is going to be task-based research, collaborating around common goals to produce a bespoke output for their target group. So we will be working them hard, and they will be trying to choose and select mechanisms and facilitation techniques that will give Winchester a sense of momentum and action, not just talking around the same things that have been maybe talked about time and time again. The way we're going to record this, as Richard said at the beginning, the global pandemic meant that some of the face-to-face stuff has not been possible. So we're going to try and replicate what we might do in real life, which would be a scrapbook of ideas and achievements and bits of maps, text, film and so on, but they're going to be digital scrapbooks and they're going to be returned to the project team at the end. So we're going to have a whole series of reports and ideas from those groups recorded throughout. And in particular, and this comes back to the presentation before us about the local plan and its reinvention through the planning white paper, there's going to be a very strong spatial dimension to what we're doing. Each of the working groups will be plotting down ideas and actions and areas of intervention on a map as far as possible every time. So at the end of this, the digital scrapbook will be a map of Winchester with ideas across it. So we are producing some sort of spatial document through this work. Obviously today, 17th of September, the meeting, the kick-off date is Tuesday next week. Emails have gone out along those lines and we're getting confirmations back, some still to arrive, but we're on a joint introductory session across all 5 groups, and then we spin out later that morning into the 5 individual groups. A quick introduction, like a mini manifesto from these people about how they're going to work with each other. Task-based to be completed by the end of the first hour. It's about doing, not talking, speed and accuracy. We don't want to plod and go around in circles on things. We're going to agree a forward plan at the end of that about who's doing what and why in the next, set up the next bit. And also at the end of that first session, responsibilities about reporter, fact finder, engager, photographer, and we're going to have a blogger, a scribe as part of that as well, which we'll come on to. So before this first session, a handbook's going to be issued. That's been circulated. I understand people have seen it. The handbook's been prepared by our team, and it contains instructions for the working phase, a summary of the findings and why we're doing what we're doing. It also contains a few case studies and ideas about what other cities around the world have done. And we've been very careful to select those that are relevant and appropriate to Winchester, to get them thinking, well, if such and such a place has done that, we can try that too, or we could adapt that for our place. So we've got some case studies for each of the target groups just to get them going. We're going to have this digital file storage area to record their ideas, the scrapbook. And it's an important point of principle here. Handbook Part 2, which is the outcome of this work, will be written by the people of Winchester, not by an outside consultancy team. So Handbook Part 1's come from us, as sort of relative outsiders to the project, but Handbook Part 2 is coming from them. I think that's a really important point of principle and symbolic in a sense that Winchester people are writing their own vision. Kathleen mentioned this earlier in the process. There was talk about getting representation of younger people into the working groups themselves, but we found in other projects that they often feel a little bit out of sorts. They may be a bit too shy to contribute, and maybe there's a disconnect. So Jenny Savage is going to give particular attention to young people in parallel with the working groups, and Councillor Crace has been very helpful, sort of prototyping some of those ideas with his own family. But we're going to have a teenage girls urban design group and a youth focus group that will feed into the process, and that's already underway in terms of arranging that. So at the end of this period, we're going to have a lot of work, a wealth of material. Our team's going to collect them in, translate that into a single entity, and there's been some concern raised by some members about what will the vision document look like. Well, we know that it's going to be a collaboration of those 5 pieces of work. We're going to create a polished, publishable version, and that's your vision for Winchester. It's going to contain a whole series of action points, a whole series of mechanisms and facilitation techniques that you can use to create action moving forward. But that will be subject to a steering group meeting and your November town forum meeting before that goes public and is released, as it were. Now, this is a really important point about what happens over the next few weeks, and it goes back to answer sort of some of the points Patrick Davis raised at the beginning of this and that Simon then reiterated. We want a very transparent process here so that each working group, after each session, within 24 hours, will be required to write a short blog post, 200 words or so, saying what they got up to that session, what their findings were, and what they're talking about next time. So that, in a sense, is a set of minutes from their session and an agenda for the next one. Those blogs will be put on the website and shared through the social channels. And we want members tonight to maybe amplify that by retweeting and reposting those blogs. That'll be an online gallery of the workings, so it's a proof of action and of being heard. So it'll be up there. And the 4th little bullet point here with the thumbs up, this is where we want the wider public to comment on these blogs, react to the ideas and make suggestions for the topic and actions that the group should focus on. And this is where groups like City of Winchester Trust and other organisations can see in real time what these groups are up to, what they're talking about, and contribute and chivvy them along and say, you need to talk about this or that, or alert them to different ideas. And what we're getting there is that positive feedback loop. The last point here, that's Winchester people, Winchester organisations talking to Winchester and back again. So the working groups are necessarily small and focused to give us a productive number of people in a group. We've kept them small deliberately, but we do not want to exclude any other contributors to this process. That work will be out there to be engaged with, and contributions are not just welcome, but actively encouraged as part of this process. So this is the conclusion of the project. Friday, 23rd of October, that's our nominal conclusion of the working phase, when all those digital scrapbooks will be as full as they can be. We've got a turnaround time with our team to start to translate this into your vision. Week beginning 2nd of November, there'll be a project steering group to run through that with Simon Finch and Lorna and colleagues. November the 11th is your scheduled town forum meeting. And then into the end of the month, what we want to do, certainly before December, is this idea of a symposium, a sort of online launch event where all the people that contributed to the vision, working groups, and those that contributed outside will be invited along. They'll take the stage, not us. We would like to take a back seat, really. We want those that have been involved to share the vision and present it and make those recommendations. And it's going to be a sort of celebratory evening of Winchester's people and ideas, and it's a sort of launch event for the decade that follows, really, the 10-year vision. And that's how we want to draw things to a conclusion at the end of November. And that's our run through.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you both. I do urge everyone to go and look at the blog posts on the website. I looked at them this week and it's a really interesting perspective on the city. Even though I spend my days walking these streets with my toddler, it was really interesting to watch the video, and just the thing that struck me was how loud the traffic noise was. And for a child, that must be deafening. So the importance of having walking routes that are quieter really struck me. Are there any other questions that anyone has? I may be getting one via another means. Nope. There we go. They're coming in. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I just wanted, how diverse are the groups that you pulled together?
Let me try and answer that first, Councillor Todd. Richard may add to this. I mean, we've been very conscious from the start that the brief to us was to reach out to the widest possible network of people within Winchester, to go beyond the city centre, and we've been involved in obviously previous meetings with you and your colleagues where we've discussed potential people who might be interested to talk to us or write blog posts and whatever. So we have made strenuous efforts right from the outset in terms of sort of, ethnic minorities, those with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, youth groups as well, and we've had some success with that actually in terms of kind of feedback and interviews, particularly sort of through the website and social media side. The groups are probably don't reflect the perfect cross section of the diversity of the city, unfortunately, but as you'll appreciate, there we reach out to people, and some people take up the offer and some people don't, and we've been slightly frustrated by or disappointed, shall I say, with those who haven't taken up our invitation.
I'd just also say that the groups currently fall about 50-50 men and women. We do have some people who have worked with or are active in volunteering with some of those groups that maybe aren't represented directly. And one thing we want to do in the first session is actually speak with one of the things that groups will be doing is if they feel they as a group, say the working group on movement or on ecology or whichever the topic is, feel they'd like to be more diverse, one of the things we'd like them to do is in their research phase is speak to those that they feel perhaps need to be better represented. and we'll facilitate that. So it's not finished, as it were. It's not a closed set of people at this stage in terms of the way they work. The membership we want to keep small, but who they speak to and who they engage with and how they do that can be used in a way to rebalance things if they feel that's not quite as it needs to be. But as Richard said, we do have ethnic minority representation on the groups. We do have LGBTQ representation. We've got disability work, people who've worked with them and can bring that on board as well. But we've certainly done everything we can in terms of the approaches. We are fairly comfortable as far as we can be at this stage.
Thanks. Councillor Kresk.
Thank you. Impressive presentation as always. I think back in March I kind of made reference to the fact that we're trusting you with the future of Winchester, and was that something that you were prepared for? And I'm continuing to be glad that you did, or that you're doing this, and we did trust you. But to some extent, it feels like you're in turn trusting the people of Winchester and expecting us to trust the people of Winchester, which is the right thing, certainly. But just want to understand what your thoughts and plans are to support them, so this small group of people have what they need to deliver the outputs that we expect and need. And it's probably something that they've not done before, and it's going to take some skills to involve the City of Winchester Trust, for example, in a proactive way, in a responsive way. How do we make sure that people who are not professionals necessarily, and I don't know who these people are who are on the working group, how do we make sure that they have what it takes to collaboratively engage and constructively engage, and might there be some tension perhaps, and how do you plan to work through that if there are such tensions?
I'd like to think there is some creative tension, maybe, that we've got the right dynamics. We've tried to do that, but you're right, Councillor, that we need to be very supportive of them. And the 5 of us that will be mentoring the groups, we've all got good experience of this sort of engagement work. But I like the fact you've picked up on the fact that, we were grateful that you've trusted us to do the project, and in return, I'm glad you spotted that our process here is about then trusting Winchester people to do the work with us. We felt it's not appropriate just to write a report and hand it over, and that's why this handbook part 1 is our contribution to the final vision, but handbook part 2 will come from them. They'll be the authors of their own work, and we want to support them with that. The support will come in various forms. We're going to be online with them. We'll be providing facilities for them to share, helping them with the blog writing if they need it. We've got various tech platforms we want to use to help them express their ideas on mapping. We're going to share email addresses and phone numbers. Pick up the phone if you're stuck. That's we're going to be alongside them over this next month to support them in everything they do on that. We want them to collaborate with each other. So we, on the first one, a bit of, introduce each other, make sure they can speak to each other. One thing we want to do, maybe worth mentioning, we didn't say in the slideshow, we are not looking for the groups to collaborate with each other. They've got enough to do in their own target group to focus on. But the facilitation team, the 5 of us here, will be regularly comparing notes over the next few weeks about what each group's been up to and spotting the overlaps that are occurring between the groups, the common ground. That will be our role. And the hope, that's where we want to take it. If there is any sort of argumentative characters that we haven't spotted, we've got techniques to make sure that they contribute in a very positive, successful way. I mean, we've made it very clear what's expected of them in terms of a working group member. This is about collaboration and moving forward, and those that have signed up have sort of understood that, we hope.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There we go. Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Chair. Just want some clarity between, obviously, the Winchester Town Forum is us members, which are made up of unparish wards, which collectively comes into the Winchester Town Forum. But where does this sit with the administration of the City Council? Because obviously we're all City Councillors and we have an administration. We've obviously got cabinet members, you know, involved in this meeting today. We obviously got the lead of the council in this meeting today. So it's great that the Town Forum is taking on another vision for Winchester, which has been great before, because I remember sitting on the panel before with previous councillor, chairman of Brian Collins' leadership there, and it really sort of in the end sat on the shelf and got a bit dusty really, because I think and gentlemen are quite correct in saying in their presentation, Winchester are pretty frustrated that an awful lot of things get talked about and actually a lot of things are not being fulfilled. And there's a bit of clarity we need to be honest with Winchester folks, is the Town Forum haven't got the big budgets and got the big decision makers. It's the City Council administration, which is the decision makers, and administration, which has actually got the will of where they're going to go with what should happen in the city. So we need to sort of have clarity about exactly. And it's fantastic that the groups, 5 groups, will be bringing in all sorts of research and some specialist people. But there's got to be also honesty of how far and how limiting the Town Forum can take this without the cohesion with the administration of the Winchester City Council. So there's always a sort of the public out there may sort of think, well, you're the council, but it doesn't quite work that as we move forward. And I think we need to make sure there's a bit of honesty about the conclusions that this is a Town Forum, because we're unparished elements. And of course the other parish wards like Badgers Farm and Alders Battery, Harestock and Littleton may be saying, well, where's our vision? Because we sort of border the town sort of unparished wards, and where's the sort of cohesion with us as parishes as well. And so I can see there's a little bit of what I don't want is leading for more residents to be frustrated, because we've got a fantastic vision, all looks good and all song and dance and so forth like that, but it's actually very limited to what it can actually provide moving forward for the citizens of Winchester.
Can I make a brief response to that? Is that okay, Chair?
Yep.
May not be the right thing to say at this point, but whilst our commission is from the Town Forum, we've not limited ourselves to necessarily the footprint of the wards that you represent. We've been asked to and clear about from the start the fact that we would look at the whole footprint of the city of Winchester, and even at its fringes as well. So we haven't been, as I'm sure you would appreciate, spending a great deal of time bothering about which parishes or which wards are which, and where the lines are and so on. We've been looking at the thing in a kind of real world version, I suppose. The other point just that you mentioned about sort of budgets and so on, again, we haven't, I guess it's probably rare that a vision would get to the nitty-gritty of budgets and so on, but one of the things that we probably will touch on in the working groups is is projects at the grand scale, but probably projects also at the micro scale, things that are very affordable, even basically free, things that can be done by communities by themselves, rather than without necessarily involving the City Council in any way, or the Town Forum. And so the whole breadth of potential improvements and actions and implementations of projects large and small. So I think hopefully that's some kind of an answer.
And just quickly add to that, I think a lot of the messages we heard is not lack of money that's led to the frustration previously. It's the lack of the processes or the mechanisms that have allowed people to contribute and feel influential in the city have not been fit for purpose or whatever. So budgets absolutely matter, and how people may be able to deliver things moving forward will certainly be dependent on that. But the working groups are more about creating ways of working that are in a sense independent of budgetary constraints.
Thank you. That's really kind.
And I just add, Councillor Scott, that of course we will be pushing as hard as we possibly can for the vision to be incorporated into whatever binding documents we have coming forward, so that it is tied very much into the outcomes that we want for the city. And if we don't deliver that, then the people of Winchester will ultimately have their say. But I do hope that this is a document that, because especially as it has been prepared by the residents of Winchester, this isn't a politically motivated document in any way, that it will be something that is maintained by whoever is in control of the council. So I don't want this to be a political document, but something that is seen for the people of, by the people of Winchester, for the people of Winchester, and it not to become a political football, as it were. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the Richards for the presentation, as always, and I think Timo is there in the background, so thank you all very much. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the town accounts. Mr. Kennedy, I'm sorry, you are always the last in these agendas. Are you there?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to turn your camera on so we can see you? It's always nice to see our officers.
And apologies, Chair, we've got Richard Eastman on my screen as well.
Okay, Richard Easton, would you mind turning your camera off, please? Thank you. Hi, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So just to give a brief update on the current financial position of the Winchester Town accounts and the budget process for this year. So this is the first paper outlining the current financial position moving into the budget setting and options process. The informal accounts group, we've all met up to start those initial discussions and outline the areas of review for the months ahead. This will lead into a budget options paper, which will go to the November Town Forum, and then final recommendations at January Town Forum, recommending to Cabinet the budget for 2021-22. To go through some of the main points in terms of the forecast for this year, which is shown in Appendix A alongside a refresh of projections for the years ahead. There's no significant changes to that forecast at the moment. Most of the Town Forum's funding obviously comes from the precept, so that's a pretty stable source of funding. So there are no significant changes there. And in terms of expenditure, that's all been quite stable this year, despite obviously the current situation. None of that has had a significant impact on the town. There is a loss of income claim which is due at the end of this month, which the government have announced, and the town will feature within that, but only to a limited extent in terms of some lost income for sports pitches, where obviously they weren't used for a number of months. So the town will hopefully receive some recovery of income alongside that claim. Obviously, just in terms of giving a brief update, so the town precept, that's £71.27 at the moment. We're not expecting to get any updates from government on council tax referendum limits, which the town is subject to. It's been set at 3% or £5 for a number of years now, and we're not expecting any changes. We can't rule that out entirely, but we expect that to remain the case. So that's certainly the assumptions that we're going with at the moment. There's a review of fees and charges underway, which takes place on an annual basis. The main town sources of fee and charge income are from cemeteries and open spaces. There's been a number of reviews of cemeteries charges over the last few years, so I don't think we're expecting any significant changes. but that will be reviewed again over the coming months. And also open spaces, there has been a thorough review of sports pitch charges underway at the moment. I think that's planned to come to November town forum meeting with proposals for that. So that's due to come to the next town forum meeting. Community infrastructure levy, there's a summary update on that. Obviously there will be more of a detailed update on community infrastructure levy. This just gives a summary position of the receivable balance as of April, which was 875,000, and some of the major commitments made against that. That's shown in 11.9, and that also links through to the next section of capital expenditure, because obviously still is a major source of funding for the town. So that links through into the change in pavilions, north walls in particular. And finally, in terms of reserves, the projections show a strong position in terms of forecasting the reserves position at the moment. The town strategy has a contingency balance of 10% within that. Whilst that drops slightly below in 21-22, there is some flexibility around options, for example, the preset and the final recommendations for the preset. That's one option that could be used, or other options could be to review particularly the one-off expenditure plans and when exactly those take place. But the long-term position at the moment, and obviously that's before any options have come forward, that will be part of the next paper. But this current baseline projections paper shows a strong position there. And that's it in terms of an update. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think we've got one question so far from Councillor Scott.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Darren, it's nice to see you, young man. Thank you for coming on screen. COVID, over the last number of months, obviously, has been an interesting sort of factor for us, for city councillors. How much has it affected the town forum budget moving forward, as in trying to get the town back up to speed, making sure people are safe and so forth like that? Or have we made any savings via COVID, shutdown or something like that? I mean, where does it sort of rest within the sort of the budget sort of programming, and moving forward, if we anticipate another sort of spike in winter, are we geared up as a town forum to have a contingency in the budget to actually respond to anything more measures that we need to put into town to keep residents safe?
So I'll deal with income and expenditure separately. So in terms of income, the town doesn't really have the same challenges, isn't faced with the same challenges as the district, because most of the town income comes from the preset, which obviously won't be affected for this year because that's set, and shouldn't have significant implications over the coming years. Cemeteries income has been relatively stable, so there's no real implications there. It's sports pitches that have been mainly affected, but that's not a large source of income from the town, and it does form part, certainly for this year, of a loss of income claim that we'll be completing. So that money should come back from the government, which is a percentage of lost income. So that will come back through. In terms of expenditure, a significant proportion of expenditure within the town is contractual expenditure, obviously with contractors such as ID Verdi, and as far as I'm aware, all of that work has been continuing pretty much as planned. There might have been some flexible working around that, but that's been going ahead as it always has been. And in terms of any one-off expenditure schemes, that's been those have been dealt with within the district, so they haven't really had any implications within the town. So financially there haven't really been any significant implications resulting from coronavirus. Obviously, I don't know whether any plans coming forward, any proposals that might be made, that will be considered, obviously, as whether that forms part of the district or the town budget. So that will be considered at the time. But so far, there haven't been any. No.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All of you, but you may have a very odd picture of me frozen on your screens at the moment. I apologise for that. Are there any further questions? I can't see anything on the chat at the moment. So if not, we'll move to debate. Any debate? Nope. So the recommendation is that we note the financial projections and agree the budget timetable for 2021-2022. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Lovely.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy, as always. And sorry for keeping you up.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, I'm hoping we can run through very quickly. It's an informal group update. So for each of the informal groups that we have, if someone could just provide a sentence or two on the work that's been undertaken since, I think probably since lockdown, because I'm not sure how much has happened over the summer period. Sorry, I'm just coming to the groups here. So I think the first group is the High Street group. I think Councillor Hutchison, you were willing to update on that one.
I'm very happy to do so. We had a meeting earlier this week. The High Street group has really focused on trying to get St Maurice's Covert moving, and we've seen that it has been repaved, and that's a very good start, and we're delighted. But there is still outstanding work that was planned and is budgeted for, and I'm very hopeful that following the meeting we had on Monday, there will be a meeting within the next 2 or 3 weeks at which we will completely bottom out exactly that and move forward satisfactorily. The actual High Street element hasn't really got off the ground, although that was raised at the meeting on Monday, and as a start, members of the group are going to be meeting on the High Street this coming Monday to do a walkabout and to identify some of the particular issues. And I think that, I hope, will basically be kickstarting the work of the broader work of the High Street group.
There's much point doing an update on the planning group because that has been focused so much on the vision, although perhaps we do need to meet to discuss the latest changes. On the governance group, I have met with officers to discuss constitution changes that may be required to formalise in some ways the role of the town forum in accordance with a paper that we had last year, and I am hoping to meet with officers to discuss how the town forum can have a better or an increased role in planning. Obviously, that is also going to be affected by the consultations that are out at the moment, but I think it's worth having that discussion. North Walls, sorry, Councillor Hiscock, did you want to have a very quick update?
Yeah, very quick. We've appointed the consultants and we've met with them, and the parameters are set, the boundaries of the area they're looking at are set, and they've had further meetings with officers since then, and it's underway, and we should get a report back, I think, in November. Is that right? I think it's that's the sort of timescale we're looking at anyway. And the pavilion is set to go. The work's carrying on, sort of pre-construction work is going on now, and we're hoping to get it up and running by next season, although we'll see what happens on that. But it's there. We've had the press release already, which we've seen from in the Chronicle last week, talking about the pavilion, and we're very pleased to see it underway, even if some of the numbers seemed a bit odd. But I think we've resolved that one now.
Yes, I do have a clarification on that. The numbers remain pretty much as they were when they presented to this town forum earlier in the year. Unfortunately, the numbers in the Chronicle weren't reported as accurately as they ought to have been. They have received some further donations, but by and large, the numbers are as they were when they presented to us. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's it.
No, it's fine. The Town Accounts Grants Group, Councillor Ware, are you able to provide a very quick update?
Yes,
the work of that group.
So I think as we discussed at the last meeting, we are going ahead with the town account small grant scheme that was opened early in the summer, and there's a fund of 7,000 available for small grants of up to 500 each. So applications are still being sought. Applications close on the 9th of October, and we'll be conducting online interviews with applicants after the closure date. So that's me. I've got a second point that I just wanted to move with the town forum, and I'm hoping we can do this reasonably informally. I understand we don't need to formally. We are also continuing to run the crowdfunding scheme for the town account, which currently organisations can seek up to £2,000 from the town forum crowdfunder if they can match fund to 2,000, and we'd like to consider raising that to 3,000, just to give organisations in Winchester an opportunity to go out, both to raise more money and to double that from the crowdfunding scheme. And I'm wondering, Chair, if you'd mind my putting that forward to the town forum. My understanding is we only need to informally agree this within the town forum. That would be to raise the amount that would be available for crowdfunding organisations to raise and to have match funded out of the town account.
No, that's absolutely fine. I just to confirm that doesn't mean the total amount of money available doesn't change. It's the ceiling for which the ceiling of the funding that each organisation can receive is raised.
That's exactly right. The total amount is 33,000 that's available for the year, but organisations could bid up for up to 3,000 match funding.
I'm happy to move that. Can that be agreed? Does anyone have any opposition to that?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
All I have to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. The Town Accounts Group, I think we probably don't need an update either, because we have had the report from Mr. Kennedy. And the last group is our newest group is the KGV group. Councillor, I'm not sure who was going to present on that one. Councillor Ware, is that you again?
Well, I'm just going to say we are planning to convene the KGV group based on some work. I don't know whether Councillor Lerney would just like to update us on where they are, and we will be convening the group to look at this and to take it forward, really to ensure that we get a really participatory approach to the sort of follow through on the work that's being prepared for us.
Thank you. We have been delayed in this because of COVID and the sheer amount of work the estates team have needed to do. We have actually resolved some of the side issues relating to the scheme, which will be reported to the group when it meets. Officers have been asked to produce some plans for feasibility. So we're not as far as moving to proper architect's plans, but at least we'll have something where we can look at it and go, do we think that looks like what we want, and work out the costings. Finance will continue to be a challenge, but the group will need to explore how we fund the pavilions. As I've said before, and as I said in Cabinet, I think this is a really important scheme, not only for the town, but actually for the district because of its support for girls football. So certainly we will be seeking some district support as well as seeking funding from the town.
Thank you very much. The next item of business is to note the current version of the work programme for this year. Sorry, everything's a little bit slower now. Now on this, you will note that there are two papers that were originally proposed for this meeting. They have been moved to the November meeting. They relate to open spaces, fees and charges and Magdalen Hill Cemetery Garden. The other thing to note is the membership of the informal groups. Again, with the resignation of Councillor Gottlieb, he will inevitably come off those groups. So if there's anyone who wishes to join a group that isn't currently on one of those groups, speak now. That will be a no then. Are we able to note the work programme for the coming year then?
Chair, just to say as well, yes. I'll add on the 11th of November meeting, I'll add the vision for Winchester update.
Thank you very much.
As well.
Did everyone hear that? We're not sure the technology if you're all hearing from the microphone.
Yes.
Yes, I heard it. Fantastic. That will be added to the November meeting. So can we note the work programme for 2020-2021?
Noted.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry we are 13 minutes over. Hopefully everyone can go and get their dinner now. Thanks all, and thanks for those listening online as well.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Goodbye.